There is a place in this world where men go to prove they are real. Not for money, not for fame. To prove to themselves and no one else that they can endure what no human being should ever have to endure. Tony Ferguson was that place for 12 different men, and every single one of them walked out, changed. But on May 9, 2020, inside an empty arena in Jacksonville, Florida, no crowd, no noise, just the hollow echo of bone against bone. It was Tony Ferguson who walked out different, and he was never the same again. This is the story of the most terrifying man in UFC history, and how he disappeared, not in defeat, in dissolution. To understand how something falls, you first have to understand how high it stood. Between 2013 and 2019, the UFC lightweight division was the most dangerous place in combat sports, the deepest ocean, and it was filled with the greatest sharks on the planet. Tony Ferguson ate them alive, but Tony wasn't a normal fighter. He didn't have the textbook boxing of an Olympic champion. He didn't have the picture-perfect wrestling of a Division I standout. What he had was something that has no technical name. He fought like defeat was an abstraction that simply did not apply to him. He attacked from his back like the ground was an advantage. He threw spinning elbows from angles that don't exist in any MMA manual. He bled and became more dangerous. There was something psychologically disturbing about fighting Tony Ferguson, because when you hit him, and you did hit him because it was impossible not to, he smiled. Not the smile of a man absorbing pain, the smile of a man who needed it. 12 consecutive wins, the longest streak in lightweight history, the interim championship. Every road in the sport led to the same conclusion. There was a man who needed to be stopped, and nobody knew how. He was the boogeyman, El Cucuy. And there was only one ghost capable of haunting him: Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson. In mixed martial arts, there are great fights, and then there is this one. 5 times the UFC tried to make it happen. 5 times the universe said no. Injuries, medical emergencies, contract disputes, personal tragedies, and finally, a global pandemic. But the cancellation that changed everything didn't come from any of those. It came from a TV cable. In 2018, during a media obligation, days before the most important fight of his career, Tony Ferguson tripped over a thick black cable lying on the floor of a dark studio. He tore his LCL clean off the bone. For any athlete, that's a year on the shelf. For many, it's the beginning of the end. 5 months later, Tony Ferguson was back. He fought Anthony Pettis in one of the bloodiest wars in UFC history, and won. Everyone saw it as proof of invincibility. What none of us understood was that we were watching the beginning of the end, because there is a price for bending your body beyond human limits. And that price doesn't show up right away. It shows up later, quietly, with interest. May 2020. The world had stopped. The pandemic canceled the Khabib fight for the 5th and final time. And instead of waiting, because Tony Ferguson never waits, he accepted a replacement. Justin Gaethje, the highlight. A man who doesn't win fights. A man who dismantles people. The arena was empty. Without a crowd, the silence amplified everything. Every impact echoed like a gunshot. And for 24 minutes, Gaethje shot with surgical precision. Over 100 significant strikes to Tony Ferguson's head. Over 100. Any other human being would have gone down in the first round. But Tony's greatest weapon, the legendary toughness, the iron chin, the absolute refusal to quit, became his worst enemy. Because while his body refused to fall, his brain absorbed every single blow. In the 5th round, Gaethje threw a clean, straight jab. Simple, almost gentle. Tony stopped, shook his head, stepped back, and for the first time in his career, his body rejected his mind's command to move forward. The referee stepped in. Silence. The streak was over, but more than the streak, the aura was over. The boogeyman had bled, and the rest of the division understood for the first time that he was just a mortal man. What comes after is hard to watch, not because it's violent, because it's sad. Tony came back 6 months later and was dominated by Charles Oliveira, then by Beneil Dariush, then by Michael Chandler, who knocked him unconscious with a front kick that slow-motion cameras turned into a nightmare. The speed was gone. The reflexes were gone. The movement that once looked chaotic and was in reality deeply calculated now simply looked lost. That night against Gaethje had aged Tony Ferguson a decade in 24 minutes. And the worst part wasn't losing. It was that he wouldn't stop. 3 losses, 5, 7. He tied the record for the longest losing streak in UFC history, the same man who once held the longest winning streak. Fans begged him to walk away. Dana White hinted it was time. Doctors, analysts, everyone around him pointed to the same exit. But how do you explain to a man who spent his entire life learning that quitting is the only real defeat, that it's time to quit? Tony Ferguson is not a story about failure. It is a story about the price of greatness. For 7 years, he was the living definition of human will in sport. He was the nightmare that woke champions at 3 in the morning. He was proof that the mind can bend what the body cannot. The problem is that isn't sustainable. The sport has no memory. It doesn't care what you've done. It only cares what you can do right now. And when right now runs out, it moves on without you. But the fall of El Cucuy only matters because the climb was extraordinary. You only mourn the fall of those who rose high enough to fall from. And Tony Ferguson rose very, very high. There is one moment that defines everything. In one of his final fights between strikes, Tony Ferguson turned to the camera and smiled. The same smile as always. Not the smile of a man who was winning, the smile of a man who knew he was losing and had decided that changed nothing. Maybe that's what El Cucuy never understood, that sometimes the most courageous thing a warrior can do is stop fighting. Should the UFC have the power to force fighters into retirement? That question has no easy answer, because in this sport, the line between determination and self-destruction is razor thin, and the men capable of reaching the top are precisely the men incapable of recognizing when it's time to leave. Drop your answer in the comments, and if this story hit you the way it hits everyone who truly knows this sport, share it, because stories like Tony Ferguson's deserve to be remembered the right way. Not as failure, as a Greek tragedy. And Greek tragedies were always about the same thing. Men who carried their greatness so high that the weight of it destroyed them. El Cucuy was great. That's the whole point. Until next time, respect the fighters,